It's 2022 and Samsung has just announced the Samsung Galaxy S22 series, chief among the bunch being the Note-like S22 Ultra. But what if instead of paying 4 figures for a smartphone, you instead wanted to pay around £650? Pounds that is, not figures. Well, that's where last year's best smartphone comes in. Yes, you heard it correctly, you can buy an S21 Ultra for around £650 on the used market on eBay. So what's it like in 2022? How does it compare to the new flagship? Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas and this is my in-depth review of the S21 Ultra in 2022. I'm sure many an Apple fanboy is really upset by the fact I called the S21 Ultra the best phone of last year when many called the iPhone 13 Pro the best phone of last year, but I don't feel like the iPhone was. It might be more well-rounded, it might be slightly cheaper, but the S21 Ultra packed in incredible camera hardware, good performance, the best screen, and pretty much everything else that the iPhone had, but the Samsung did it a little bit better in my opinion. Is it better value for money? Maybe at this point, but not at the time. Of course, it was a lot more expensive. For £650 on the used market, this is an incredible deal. Let's start off with the display and design. These two go hand in hand. The S21 Ultra has a brilliant, literally in that respect, 6.8-inch Quad HD Plus 120Hz OLED screen. It's huge. I mean, it's surrounded by relatively small bezels anyway, and it has now the staple single punch hole in the center at the top for the selfie camera. This is probably the best screen in your house if you're buying this smartphone. It's going to be better than your TV, than your laptop, than your computer monitor. It's just that good. This is thanks in part to its 120Hz refresh rate, but also due to the fact that it has a 1500 nit peak brightness. That's really bright. If you're a gamer or watch lots of content on your phone, this is the one for you. It's that simple. Now, gaming isn't particularly smooth on the European and UK variants with the Exynos chipset. It's not bad, but it's not great. The Snapdragon version is the one to get if you can get it. Of course, it's only available in certain regions, but it does give you much better performance, especially from that GPU. The big screen, you might imagine, would contribute to poor battery life, but in reality, the S21 Ultra's battery life is pretty decent. It's a 5000 mAh cell, so it's not huge, but it's pretty big. And I would say that with the Exynos chipset that I can't speak for the Snapdragon counterpart, but with the Exynos version I have here, it will get me through a full day absolutely fine. Sometimes give me about 30% when I wake up in the morning. I am not a particularly heavy user, so I use my phone for about 2 to 3 hours a day, all combined. I do stream some Bluetooth music, or music over Bluetooth, for about half an hour a day. I'm mostly on Wi-Fi, if I'm quite honest, with a little bit of LTE, and I use my brightness at about 50 to 60%, I would say. If you're a gamer, this thing is going to cut out long before the end of the day, but again, it really does depend on your workload, and screen on time figures are just absolutely awful. Not the screen on time figures for this phone, but screen on time metrics as a whole. We must talk about the fact that you don't get a charger in the box. Is it wrong? Absolutely. Is it going to continue to happen? Probably. Software is one of Samsung's strongest suits, and that's funny because back in 2016 when I started making YouTube videos on a regular basis, you couldn't say that. TouchWiz and Samsung Experience were heavy and bloated. One UI by comparison is fantastic, and as I've said in many previous videos, my favourite Android skin at the moment. My UK model has One UI 4 based on Android 12. It got the update relatively recently on this model, and it works flawlessly. It's really clean, it looks great, it features really well. I mean, yeah, there's nothing bad I can say about it, aside from the ads. Yes, there was a caveat, there is a but there. There are ads in the OS. Are they intrusive? Well, if you've never used ads on any kind of, anything before, whether that be social media or an OS, then you might be a bit upset, but to be honest, they're not that intrusive on here. The hardware, well, that feels pretty modern. Lots of glass and metal, granted. I'm not the biggest fan of this domino camera bump thing, but the thin bezels and the matte back and the downplayed aesthetic do look good in my opinion. The in-display fingerprint scanner is better than many that I've used. This ultrasonic versus the optical one, I think the ultrasonic wins out on this for me. Optical ones are just a little bit slow. Not as good as a capacitive, proper dedicated reader, but not bad. And now we must move on to the cameras. Probably the main reason that I'd call this the best phone of last year. Apple or Google might have had better software and processing, and Huawei might have had better hardware, but this is the best all-round system for combining incredibly powerful hardware with efficient and featureful software. The main sensor is a huge 108 megapixel unit that bins down to 12 megapixel images, which means big dynamic range and big low light performance. The 12 megapixel ultra wide and 10 megapixel 3x telephoto cameras aren't quite as good as the main, but are still pretty powerful. These are joined by the 10 megapixel 10x telephoto on the back, the big square one. This camera is one of the best zoom cameras on a smartphone, still not as good as the S22 Ultras, but it's still very good. These are all joined by a 40 megapixel selfie camera on the front. Let's talk specifically about the samples. They're great. I mean, I happen to really like Samsung's approach to colours anyway. They add contrast and saturation to make images look more interesting. Apple goes a little heavy on the HDR in my opinion, and Google's Pixel camera is pretty close to Samsung's in terms of colours. The main 24mm is the best, of course. The huge sensor gets loads of light, the fast f1.8 aperture gives you real depth of field without portrait mode, and the huge resolution equates to very detailed images. If this was the only rear camera on the device, I don't think I'd complain. It's very good. The ultra-wide isn't quite as good, but it does have the second largest sensor on this device, meaning that along with the f2.2 aperture, it can capture a good amount of light and produce some detailed, high dynamic range images. It is a distinct drop-off in quality from the main, but remains one of the better flagship ultra-wides. The 3x telephoto on paper sounds really uninteresting, but it's a really nice focal length for capturing images that look different to other phone cameras. This is because the 72mm focal length is like a standard portrait lens on a full-frame camera, so you get an almost professional camera aesthetic, but without the need to stand as far back from the subject. Which leads me on to the big one, the 10x periscope zoom camera. This is one of the coolest things to show off to your friends while simultaneously being mega handy and giving you a really cool perspective. Even with a relatively small sensor and a closed-in f4.9 aperture, you still get shallowish depth of field too because of the compression of a long lens. The 8K and Ultra HD video from the S21 Ultra are great, there's lots of detail, a good amount of stabilization specifically for the Ultra HD video, and I happen to really like the look of the video. It's not overly HDR heavy. I could easily use this footage in my reviews, and fun fact, I do have something coming up with footage from this phone in it. If you've been listening to what I've been saying for the past 7 or 8 minutes, it's probably no surprise that this thing gets my recommendation for under £700, $650 for a slightly scratched up one, and you spend more, you get a better condition one. I seriously think this is one of the best value smartphones you can get, and I say that not in the way that it's a budget smartphone, because it definitely isn't, and I've said in previous videos, budget and value are different things. For around the price of a Pixel 6, you are getting an unbelievable smartphone. It will continue to get software support going for the next couple of years. It's got an incredible display, it's got amazing cameras. This really is the full package, and it's about half the price that it came out as. And with that, I'm going to leave today's video, guys. I want to give a massive shout out to Vodafone for sending out the S21 Ultra. They've been sending out a lot of stuff recently, and actually they resent out the S21 Ultra, so I thought I'd give it a go and do a proper in-depth review, because the previous one was a little bit haphazard. I also want to give a massive shout out to my patrons for being continually supportive, so please do check out my Patreon link in the video description. It really does help out the channel. Please do like, comment and subscribe if you're new around here to never miss a video like this one. Thanks guys, I've been Ryan Thomas, and I'll catch you later. Peace.